RPGs are gaming's greatest contradiction. They're simultaneously designed to give you the ultimate freedom, the ultimate scale, the ultimate world building, and often the ultimate power fantasy, while also making everything a slog. Traversing worlds takes forever, conversations take forever, you spend a significant amount of time scrolling through menus, checking gear, watching numbers fly by, repairing weapons, managing your weight limit, and even some of the best RPGs are littered with busy work quests and time sink activities. And it's that exact contradiction that, to a lot of people, makes them so dynamic and engaging. I was talking about it with one of my friends recently, and he mentioned that slog really was the perfect word to use here, but not in a negative way. It's that total and complete commitment, the fact that the game doesn't cut anything out and instead allows you to interact with even the most minute details of the story and the world that makes them so appealing. You're not just playing the highlight reel, you're playing the role. And to be honest, that's something that I've always had a bit of a strained relationship with myself. The term RPG is really broad and sometimes hard to define, but I think what I've come to realize is that games that are considered action RPGs, like the Souls games, as well as games that align mostly with different genres but have strong RPG elements, like the new God of War games, are right up my alley. But games that skew closer to the core RPG experience, where there's more emphasis on developing your personality on top of your playstyle, you have a more active hand in building relationships and making decisions, and you have to deal with the socio-economic climate of the world you're dropped into, have just never been my thing. Basically, I'm more of a hit a giant snake person in the dome with a big wind lance first, ask 400 questions later kind of guy, and I thought that was just how it was gonna be forever. And then, this happened. Hey, sorry, this is kind of an awkward spot for you to catch me in. I'm currently lugging some sacks of seeds over into this barn over here before I head off to, shovel some poop out of a latrine. Why am I lugging sacks of seeds into a barn before I shovel poop out of a latrine? Good question. Well, I was playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and I ran into these two guys talking about poetry or something in a tavern, and I sort of got roped into that conversation, and it started a side quest. Obviously, I don't want to spoil anything here, so I'll just say that I had to go find something, and then I had to find a guy to fix that thing, and he was kind of hard to track down because he was drunk and stuck in a tree, which was a whole other side quest that I had to do, by the way. And then when I finished all of that, I was finally able to ask him the thing that I initially came there for, and he told me that I had to get another thing, which I had to travel to a different town to buy, and then I brought it back to this guy, he fixed my thing, and then I finally got back to the two guys I met initially, but found out that I wouldn't get my reward until I paid off a debt, which included lugging sacks of seeds into a barn before shoveling poop out of a latrine. So, here I am, doing that. The end of a series of wild goose chases, fairly mundane fetch quests, and a laundry list of inconveniences. It's all been topped off with this, which has been going on for a long time now. So why am I having so much goddamn fun? Even though I've never personally connected with a whole ton of games in this genre, I've always respected the attempts they make to become the ultimate, all-encompassing game experiences, borrowing from practically every subgenre of the entire medium and presenting it to you as an all-you-can-eat buffet. But with that goal comes a fundamental problem that needs to be solved. How do you make the boring shit not boring? How do you maintain this comprehensive approach to game design without losing players along the way? Especially if you want to appeal to not just core RPG players, but somebody like me, who might want to play space exploration game, or dystopian cyberpunk future game, or a cool guy with sword fights giant creatures game, but doesn't want to deal with the side of these experiences that has always personally dragged them down. And the industry solution to that problem has been interesting to see unfold in real time, because it's basically hide the boring shit at all costs. Weight limits are annoying and you don't want to have to deal with them? Have magic inventory chests right away and be able to sell your stuff in bulk so you don't have to deal with the minutia of that. Don't want to take the time to learn how to craft items? Good news, literally nothing you do in this game will ever even remotely require crafting, to the point that a few hours in you'll forget that was even a mechanic in the first place. From a quality of life standpoint, these sound great, and these decisions are basically tailor-made for somebody like me who doesn't want to be forced into these mechanics. But at the same time, this is effectively the game undercutting a lot of its own systems, and it makes me wonder why it's all even there at that point. And the answer to that seems to be for players who do want to engage with these slower systems, but it's sort of a compromise where neither side gets what they want. People who want deep, realistic experiences are served half-baked ideas that are built to be ignored, and people who find this stuff annoying are still forced to have fringe interactions with them that almost makes them feel more frustrating to deal with. Like, alright, you want to have a weapon durability system because you want to be realistic, but you also don't want it to be too much of a hassle, so it's really cheap to fix and you can do it all over the world. Which means the final result is you just have to stop exploring and fighting at random intervals just to fast travel somewhere, press a button, and then go back to where you were. Great, now it feels both boring and completely unnecessary. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has a bit of a different answer to this problem though. Force the player to deal with the boring shit until they realize that the boring shit isn't boring. Instead of almost being ashamed of some of its mechanics or catering to my playstyle, the game goes the extra mile to convince me that those mechanics are worth trying. And by doing that, it not just hooked me immediately as someone who's been critical of RPGs in the past, but it basically flipped everything I thought about the genre on its head. Because I'm gonna be honest, from a bird's eye view, this game looks like the dictionary definition of everything I hate in RPGs. It is hyper-realistic. You need to constantly manage your inventory and physical well-being. Food will spoil if you have it in your bag for too long. If you don't occasionally take the time to clean yourself, all the ladies will talk about how stinky you are. Do you know how embarrassing that is? But it finds a way to make that all engaging because every second, from the moment you boot it up, it forces you to very, very actively engage in its role-playing elements, otherwise you have absolutely zero chance of succeeding. Even to save your game outside of sleeping in a bed you own or hitting an important part of a quest, you need to find ingredients and brew a potion. So imagine how unironically ecstatic I was that after hours of losing progress over and over because I didn't have any potions, I stumbled onto this basket that had just a bunch of herbs I needed to make it. Immediately, I trekked to the nearest town, found an alchemy bench, read the recipe, prepped my ingredients, and spent 20 actual real-life minutes brewing potions just so I could save the game a few times. But even though this was a tedious process, it felt like a major win because this was my main priority. I obviously have to be able to save the game, so thank God for this basket. Except, I don't actually know if this was my main priority, because I also go hungry pretty quickly, so when I dropped into the game for the first time, I thought I should probably get some food first. Can't buy food though, because I literally have no cash, so actually my main priority is getting my money up. Except nobody wants to talk to me because I'm bum-ass naked, so first I gotta find some clothes, but again, I have no money, and no one is sympathetic towards me because I started the game being publicly shamed, so really my first priority should be to build up my reputation. But I can also do that by getting clothes that'll make people think I'm important, so maybe that is the first move. Although, if I try and steal some clothes and get caught, it'll negatively impact my reputation, so I can't really do that unless maybe I save before I steal the clothes so I can retry if I get caught. Except, hold on a second, I can't even save the game if I don't have potions, so what the hell am I even supposed to be doing here? The first few hours of KCD 2 are basically a hardcore survival game. You can't even think about getting into the action or moving the plot along because you're just trying so hard not to die. And you also know that if you accidentally stumble into combat, you're gonna get turned into Swiss cheese. And what this forced me to do was face everything I didn't like about RPGs, everything that I found boring or would intentionally try to ignore or work around, and made that the entire loop for a while. I had no choice but to deal with it, and when I did that, something crazy happened. I stopped hating it. You know how they say if you're scared of something, you just kind of have to stare at it for long enough and then it'll stop being scary? I feel like that's basically what happened to me here, and when it did, it kind of recontextualized a few things for me. I mentioned earlier how I find inventory systems with weight limits unnecessary and kind of annoying. Like, I understand that they're there for more than just realism. They're this secondary gameplay system that's meant to engage you further in your exploration, your relationship with the townspeople, and the game's economy, but every time I've had to engage with this, it still feels like I'm forced to stop doing the fun parts of the game to focus on the less engaging parts, and I hate how that breaks up the pacing. And then here, all of a sudden it came into focus. I had to constantly make real impactful choices about what was important to me and what wasn't. I needed to balance the benefits of grabbing a nearly broken piece of armor that may come in handy if I'm able to fix it up, with the downsides of having to sacrifice other equipment to make room for something that wouldn't even be useful until I poured some of my hard-earned money into repairing it. This is more than a roadblock, it's an actual genuine choice. And I realized that this is what people probably always appreciated about inventory systems, but because I'd never been forced to focus on it, and instead most games have tried to circumvent inventory issues and speed them along, to me they'd always come across as more frustrating and tedious than they had strategic. In the same way, the game's fast travel system made me look at that mechanic in a whole new light, because this game does feature fast traveling, but instead of teleporting you directly to the location you selected, you actually get to watch Henry's path and see on the timer how long it's taking you to get places. You can also get ambushed or stumble across something interesting on the way, which can stop you partway through, so it maintains the majority of the convenience of regular fast travel, but occasionally presents you with emergent moments which emphasize that you are still performing the physical act of traveling. In most games with a fast travel, it's really easy to view previously visited areas as glorified menus, and the scale of the space in between locations is completely lost. The flip side being games with no fast travel, where the spaces felt a little bit too much. But here you get to keep the quality of life, and the space still always matters, with the towns and how they're connected being distinguished in more ways than just the name and basic layout. Maybe the most surprising thing to me though was how invested I got in all the extremely optional mini side activities. I never really played Gwent in The Witcher 3, which is somehow maybe the most sacrilegious thing I've said in this whole video, because to be honest, if you give me the decision between going off and fighting some giant beast with blades and fire versus playing a card game, I'm sorry, I'm unga boongaing every time. That is way more my speed. But in KCD 2, I found myself engaging with dice extremely frequently, despite it being much less fleshed out than Gwent is. Because at the beginning of the game, when I was just dirt poor and looking for anything to help me make a little extra money, the potential of getting even $3 extra was worth the risk of losing that same amount. So I actually felt the need to try it at first, and then once I realized how simple and fun it was, it just became a regular part of my routine. I think I just described a gambling addiction. Ironically, I think the fact that these other games had so many things that did appeal to me right away was the reason that I didn't connect with them in the way that I should have. I kept trying to play these games on my terms, trying to align them exactly with the experiences that I enjoyed growing up, because if I squinted, I could see a game that appealed to me, as long as I rejected the things that I felt were too slow or wasted time. But it's only now that I'm playing a game that doesn't really appeal to me, and it's giving me no other choice but to engage with these systems, or else I have to risk essentially wasting the $70 I spent to play this game, that I finally gave up that control and started playing the game on its terms. It also helps that not only was the game forcing me to pay more attention, but what I was paying attention to was a lot richer than the average RPG. Not only do you have very limited inventory space, your horse also has very limited inventory space, and coming across chests that hold your items, especially early on, is very rare. The vendors that you interact with also have their own net worth, and you can't sell them more than the amount that they can afford. Plus, you can only sell certain items to certain types of buyers, and there's even a basic haggling system for any transaction. There's just so much more to sink your teeth into here than you get with a game that's hell-bent on removing all the friction from the experience. And I think some people might hear all of this and assume that I'm trying to say that every RPG should be like this, with these deep, realistic, hardcore simulation elements. But that's not true. If that happened, I actually think that'd be kind of annoying. What I want is for more of these games to realize that by continuously streamlining the process and attempting to remove the friction entirely, you're setting up certain types of players to only appreciate one dimension of the game, instead of what you should be doing, which is getting them to appreciate the other dimensions equally. Leveraging struggle can really be effective for any game in the genre, like genuinely any game. In fact, some of what KCD 2 does actually reminds me of another RPG I enjoyed a lot when I was younger, maybe the one that resonated with me the most up until now, and definitely the one that I have the most hours in. And I think it's worth it to look at as a smaller case study, so let's take a quick detour and talk about NBA 2K13. No, I'm serious. Before playing NBA 2K13, the only basketball game I had played was Me Basketball from Wii Sports Resort, and the only other sports game I played was NHL 2K11, a game where you were able to create a player, crank him up to level 99 on everything, and just have him rip through every team you came across. So when I loaded up NBA 2K13 for the first time, and right away I saw the My Career mode, I just kind of assumed it was the same thing, and went into it expecting to instantly turn my player into LeBron James. Instead, the game winds up turning you into LeBron James.
Junior.
In My Career, instead of just making a character and maxing out all of his stats immediately, the stats you started with were god-awful, and you had to earn them extremely slowly through the course of your fictional NBA career. It is brutal. The better you do in the practice game, the higher your draft pick, so the worse the team is that you have to play with. And unlike 2K15, you don't even get to interact with big shot celebrities like Dion Waiters.
Sounds like a wise fella to win in this league. You need all hands on deck. Good call. Check it.
And honestly, this was my favorite part of the entire mode. I remember I would basically play through My Career until my player got to a competent level of playing basketball, and then I would start it all over again. Because it was never really as fun to me to walk into every arena and drop Wilt Chamberlain numbers en route to an 82-0 season just to do it again next season. There's nothing exciting or surprising or unique in that. But even when you got really good at NBA 2K, starting a new run of My Career forced you to be a little bad still, and made you earn the right to move on to better places. Like not Charlotte. Now I should mention that when I got NBA 2K13, I didn't even really like basketball, and this mode was so good that it got me to watch the NBA in real life. And at this point, it's my favorite sport. I love the way they dribble up and down the court. Unfortunately, I did become a Dallas Mavericks fan, so it hasn't been the best time for me recently. But the fact that this game, and this mode specifically, had such an impact on me shows just how much I resonated with this structure, even as a kid. Interestingly though, I'm reminded of a section of one of Drew Gooden's recent videos where he has a completely different opinion on 2K's My Career, or at least the modern iteration of it. He talks about how gruelingly slow it is at first, and the fact that this is supposed to incentivize you to spend real-life money on speeding the process up, which is true. This was a thing back in 2K13 as well, but they have undoubtedly built the system more and more around microtransactions as the years have gone on, and in turn, the progress at the beginning has gotten agonizingly slow rather than rewardingly challenging.
This is how the game wants you to feel. They want you to hate this part, because they know the more frustrating of an experience you have, the more likely you are to just skip to option 2, spend $40 more.
So there's very clearly a limit to how far you can push this. If you go from making the player struggle to practically stopping progress entirely, it loses all of its charm, especially if there are microtransactions involved. That's something that's always bugged me about the new Assassin's Creed games. The leveling system in this series is borderline gacha, but in calculated doses, it can become so much more effective than a frictionless experience depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your game. Even still, it's interesting to see how a gameplay loop that I love can be completely hated by somebody else, and it's even more proof that there's no one way to design something. You can't account for everyone's preferences, but I really respect the games that are just okay with that. Speaking of, going back to KCD2, you can see the same motifs of struggle, friction, and mundaneness, not just in the gameplay, but also in the narrative. At a time when everything's getting bigger and stories are covering so much ground, this game succeeds by filling in every inch of a much smaller space. Instead of branching out, the story elements branch in and overlap. NPCs and locations are often reused for multiple quest lines, and not in a lazy way, but instead in a way that makes characters feel less like quest markers and vendors, and more like actual people that are constantly being referenced by others and might help you out with different problems. Townsfolk will talk about the people in neighboring areas that they might love or hate. They'll discuss local rumors and their opinions on the people who seem to be spreading them, and even smaller quests will often feature multiple familiar faces. Nothing in this game feels like its own consolidated event. It always goes back to ground you've walked before and people you already know. Let me give you an example real quick, and just so you know, there's going to be some minor spoilers here, but it's from the very early hours. It's not even a full side quest that I'll be covering, it's a side activity, and it's like a drop in the bucket for what this game is. But still, if you want to skip it, you can go to this timestamp. In the first area of KCD2, there are two small villages that are having a dispute about land, and each side actually has its own side quest for you to play through, but I'm not going to be getting into those here. If you talk to the innkeeper of one of these towns, though, who seems to be the spokesperson for this dispute, you can ask him about other things around the region that you can do, and he'll offhand offhandedly tell you about some guy called the Mouth, who's known for his tall tales around here. You can then go and find the Mouth and ask him to tell you a story, and based on some quick skill checks and your choice of which kind of story you want to hear, he'll eventually give you an earful. I chose to hear a story with a good moral, and he told me a nice little folk tale that I won't spoil here that involves a special but potentially cursed silver axe. He also ends the story by saying that it's all true and you can go check for yourself if you don't believe him. This starts a short activity where you can go to a nearby lake and follow the directions from the story to find, you guessed it, a silver axe. Unfortunately, it's broken, so you have to go to the blacksmith forge and repair it yourself, which is a whole mini activity that requires some patience. You then go back to the Mouth and tell him that you found the axe, and he's shocked, saying that he thought the story was fake the whole time and just didn't think somebody would actually try and track it down. Now, this is a pretty quick detour that KCD2 doesn't even consider a full side quest, even though it has enough meat for most other games to consider it one. Still, it's a really good showcase that even in the simplest of activities, this game is layering mechanics, areas, and characters on top of each other to create this massive web of dependent variables. The activity itself can only start when you talk to somebody who's already involved in a string of side quests. The conversation with the Mouth himself feels dependent on your choices and the skills you've built up until now. Finding the axe requires you to actually follow the steps of the story you were just told. The blacksmith whose forge you use is a key character for one of the main quest routes you can take, and smithing is an important skill that you can hone and develop separately. Every single part of this short activity winds up feeling deeply ingrained in the world and narrative that you've already experienced, rather than a fully standalone offshoot, and that's true with basically every other side story in the game, including the anecdote at the beginning of this video, which I still don't want to spoil, but this single fairly basic side quest opens up multiple others and involves 4 separate recurring characters. And to some people, that level of interconnectedness might feel like more of a nuisance than anything. If you're somebody that typically likes to just knock things off of a checklist instead of having all this extra tangential stuff to do, which is, usually how I feel, this might sound like a frustrating level of dependency, but it feels less like the game is extending the runtime of an activity by making me do a bunch of busy work, and more like all the mechanics and quests are being properly laced together to support one another. This activity could have just stopped when I grabbed the axe and maybe found it in perfect condition, but with this extra smithing step, the reward for the quest feels more personally earned, the skill feels more useful to the quest, and the blacksmith and innkeeper characters make their umpteenth appearance in early side and main quests, each instance of which deepens your bond with those characters when they could have easily been forgotten if they were just blank-faced vendors. The game even does basically the impossible with this activity and takes something that I've always hated, the illusion of choice, and makes me not really mind it all that much. I mentioned how when you talk to the Mouth, there are options or skill checks that seem to dictate what story he'll tell, or if he'll even tell you one at all, but really, it all leads to the exact same story and same quest. And the knee-jerk reaction to this for most people is that the game is essentially lying to you about your level of control and making you think your choices matter when in reality they don't at all. But by the time this quest had come along, I had already seen a ton of instances where my decisions did truly matter, significantly, to the point that the game had already fully earned my trust, and in real time, I assumed that these particular choices were no different. It was only when I looked into it further for this video that I realized that this was all set dressing, but really, as long as that illusion makes me fully believe that unique things are happening, isn't that just as good as something unique actually happening in practice? It's like any other sneaky dev trick. If you can hide it really well, it's brilliant game design, but if you can't, it'll be relentlessly picked apart by people calling your bluff. I'm looking at you, Fallout 4. So while I still have conflicted opinions on the illusion of choice as a whole, I think it's pretty amazing that this game has made me question such a long-standing opinion in the first place, and I wonder how I'll view it in other games going forward. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is not a perfect game. Even in its systems and side quest design, which I've spent so much of this video praising, there are definitely some mechanics that feel a little bit long at the tooth, and stories where the characters involved are a lot blander than normal, and that quickly takes what I love about the design and instantly unravels it into this mess of random names and unengaging activities. But it's a game that's not afraid to take massive risks, and to enjoy it, I had to take massive risks in the way I played it. I think that's why I decided to even buy this game in the first place, even though if I told somebody that I was looking for an RPG to change my mind about RPGs, this probably would be the last one on the list, because it's such a committed RPG that you kind of assume that If somebody's not on board already, they'll find nothing to like here. But I think the overwhelming sentiment from not just me, but a lot of players right now, is that games that fully commit to their ideas and don't make concessions to try and appeal to people well outside their main demographic are ultimately the games most worth playing. If they're the type of game that you already like, then perfect. If they're the type of game that you don't like, then either they have a chance to show you why you should like them, or you could just not play them. Games are getting so big and so expensive that I'm more than fine ignoring one that can't pick a lane. I think a lot of people are, and that's why you see the brutally difficult RPG, the massive turn-based CRPG, and the deeply realistic medieval RPG all becoming defining moments for the genre, while the massive space RPG for all has a hard time appealing to both the core and outside audience. This genre is maybe the pinnacle of what games are capable of, but if you take that idea too far and make a game for everyone, you wind up making a game for no one. With KCD 2 under my belt, I think I have a better framework for appreciating this genre more than I once did, and I'm honestly really excited to give some old games another shot and dive into some newer stuff that I've been hesitant about. I played most of The Witcher 3 a few years ago, and I always respected it, but never truly loved it. I think I'd appreciate it a lot more after playing this game though, so I might get back around to it. I've also really been eyeing Baldur's Gate 3. I was kind of afraid to get into it at first, because I really thought this wasn't the kind of game for me, but it turns out I might be totally wrong about that, so that's probably next on the list. I'd love to know what you guys think about modern RPGs, what you thought of KCD 2 if you've played it, and also what are other RPGs that you think I'd enjoy, preferably a few that aren't 600 hours long. If you're new here, subscribe, join the Discord, it's in the description, and check out this video on my second channel about the death of cheat codes. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.